The inspiration for Devil Bones didn't come from any particular case, as is typical for the Temperance Brennan books. It came from something that occurs occasionally. I will get in my lab something odd that I'm asked to look at, such as a shrunken head, or in some cases skulls that come in that have smoke on them, or chicken feathers, or blood, something to indicate they've been used in some context. Sometimes they turn out to be fraternity pranks, things that have been kept in a fraternity house. Sometimes they turn out to be trophy skulls that have been brought back from Southeast Asia, for example, by soldiers. And sometimes they turn out to be ceremonial objects that have been used in religious ceremonies. So I decided to take that idea. I met a student when I was teaching at McGill whose summer job it was to be a cook in a Wiccan summer camp. So I had a number of discussions with her about Wicca, and so I decided to incorporate those two ideas and look at fringe religions that are not well understood by many Americans, things like Santeria or Voodoo or Wicca. My process for writing the book is typically I start with something that's happened at the lab, and then I bring in a broader concept that I'd like the story to demonstrate. In this one, it's the idea of fringe religions that aren't understood, and also citizen vigilantism in the face of an individual losing faith in the ability of their government to protect them, whether it's to protect them against terrorism or violent crime or epidemic disease, that because of current events in the world, if we don't understand something, we tend to be afraid of it and therefore fear that maybe we're vulnerable. Devil Bones starts out with a plumber reconstructing an old house in Charlotte, North Carolina. This story takes place entirely in Charlotte, which is my hometown. It's the first one to do so. This poor plumber breaks through a wall in an old house in the basement, finds a subcellar, and in that subcellar he spots what he thinks are human skulls. So he calls the police. The police send Tempe over there. She goes down into the subcellar, and she finds quite an array of items, including human skulls and cauldrons and dead chickens and multicolored beads, and she immediately begins to suspect that she's recovering human remains from some sort of ceremonial display. I think one of the most surprising things I discovered in researching these fringe religions is how extensive they are. Their memberships are much larger than, at least so they claim in the sources that I investigated and online, for example, are much larger than I would have suspected. There are a lot more practitioners of voodoo, for example, or of Santeria than I ever suspected. We get in North Carolina Santeria, which is a syncretic religion. Santeria is a blending of traditional Catholicism, the Catholic deities such as St. Barbara or St. Jude or St. Peter, with traditional African deities. It's a religion that was brought over during this period of slavery, and when slaves were forbidden the right to practice their religion, they hid it, and they hid it by incorporating it under the outward guise of Catholic saints and deities. And it's largely Caribbean in origin, unlike voodoo, which has a French base and is largely Haitian in origin. So we have quite a bit of Santeria up the East Coast, up from Florida, up through the Carolinas, even farther north than that. Bones is beginning its fourth season. We're all astounded and delighted. We will begin with a two-part back-to-back special in which Tempe and Agent Booth are asked to go to the United Kingdom. And while in the United Kingdom, they become involved in a number of different cases that the Scotland Yard asks for their expertise to help solve them. So it lends itself to some very comedic moments. Seeley Booth in London is really pretty funny. Each episode of Bones is an original story. We have a staff of full-time writers, and they come up with their ideas for different arenas that they'd like to visit with each episode. Now, some of those clearly reflect some of the things that I've visited in my books. We did have an episode on voodoo, for example, which was set down in New Orleans. We did have an episode in which a body was found walled up behind a wall in, I believe it was a disco, which reflects some cases that I've had where mummified bodies have been found behind walls or in chimneys or something like that. So a lot of the elements that we've talked about, it doesn't specifically come into a Bones episode directly from my books, but a lot of the things that we've talked about amongst ourselves, the writers and myself and the producers, are things that are experiences I've had in real-life forensic science.